Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Take a look at Tarpley.net. Take a look always this week. Take a look in particular. Get the story on December 23rd, 1310, 700 years ago. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, the arrival of Henry VII of Luxembourg in Milan, the beginnings of the Visconti family domination of Milan, and therefore within 70, well, call it 80 years from 1390. By 1390, you've got clearly the prototype of the modern state in the Milan of the Visconti. Now, the truth of this matter has been obscured by the work of a historian by the name of Hans Baron, B-A-R-O-N. Hans Baron, writing about the crisis of the early Italian Renaissance, comes down with the absurd, fantastic idea that Gian Galeazzo Visconti is simply Mussolini before the fact, a real bad guy. And the good people, he says, are the oligarchs of the Florentine Republic, the descendants of these black Guelphs who had kicked Dante out. And these civic humanists, as he called them, are the people who rally resistance against the tyrant Gian Galeazzo Visconti. This is all completely fantastic, completely incompetent, a complete distortion of the main realities of the time. So don't get disoriented by this Hans Baron. You can see a book about the Visconti by the elder Bueno de Mesquita. Bueno de Mesquita, writing in English in Washington about 1940, around the time of the Second World War. I think this is the father or the grandfather of a sort of second or third rank neocon, also named Bueno de Mesquita, running around. Anyway, this gives you some idea of what Gian Galeazzo did, but even there, you're not going to get the full story. You've got to read it through the guidelines that I give you in the article now on Tarpley.net. It's interesting also that Hans Baron goes through this big song and dance about how for the Renaissance to keep going on, you've got to have the Florentine oligarchy and their civic humanists. This is not how a lot of people saw it. Dante, of course, dead by 1321, his successor in terms of the fight for civilization and culture in Italy in the 1300s is Petrarch, Francesco Petrarca, the great author of so many sonnets and the lyric poet who actually gives a critical contribution to the creation of German during the time that he was in Prague at the court of the Holy Roman Empire. He helped to originate the so-called Kanzlei Deutsch, the official German of the Holy Roman Empire, which was a big step on the way to the emergence of German as a literate language. So Francesco Petrarca, though, by the time it gets to be the 1350s, looking around for what to do to try to do something about the fragmentation of the Italian situation, the inevitability of foreign invasions, looting and destruction, he goes to work for the Visconti. He goes to work for the Visconti for about 5 years as a diplomat, working for the Visconti power in Milan. So Dante supports Henry VII, who brings in the Visconti, and a confirmation of that then in the 1350s. We've got Petrarch, the second of the great Tuscan trio, Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio. Petrarch also obviously convinced of the advantages of the Visconti option, goes to work for them as a diplomat and serves for about 5 years, actually only leaving Milan because the plague makes it not advisable for him to stay there. So that puts Hans Baron and his bankrupt, distorted analysis in the proper light. Now, the idea, of course, is if you don't have your national state, then what? The state created by Gian Galeazzo Visconti largely fell apart when he was presumably poisoned in 1402. There's then a period of 10 or 15 years of relative chaos. At that point, a son of Gian Galeazzo Visconti, Filippo Maria Visconti, we're now in the 1420s, 1430s, comes forward and recreates a strong Milanese state, not quite as big as what Gian Galeazzo had, but still quite formidable. That is then taken over by Francesco Sforza, a military leader, a condottiere who married Filippo Maria's daughter. And it's in this form, the Milanese state of Francesco Sforza, that the whole process is studied by somebody like Louis XI, the Valois king of France, and it's Louis XI in the 1460s who then begins creating the French national state on the Milanese model, studying the Milanese, looking at the way the Italians did things, trying to better them at their own game, certainly. But nevertheless, the starting point for Louis XI, unquestionably the Milanese state of the Visconti and then the Sforza, and that is then taken over by Henry VII, the Earl of Richmond in England, and that's the origin of such human progress as we've had. So the modern state itself, slightly more than 500 years old at this point, but the Milanese process that led to this now 700 years ago, this evening, 700 years ago, right now, as I talk to you. So contemplate the great world historical geniuses, the heroes, the courage, the tremendous human energy that has been put into the creation of the modern nation state, the most advanced, of course, the United States, with the federal Constitution inspired by Machiavelli through John Adams reading Machiavelli. John Adams, great reader of Machiavelli's discourses based on Polybius, which Machiavelli had been reading, the question of the Roman tribunes of the people, the idea of countervailing powers so that you would not have the inevitable lurch into oligarchy or tyranny, but rather some countervailing separation of powers, checks and balances. This idea, of course, comes from northern Italy, precisely what Dante is writing about, the idea that in an area where the authority of the Pope and the authority of the Emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany, come together, cancel each other out, that's where the human mind opens up and the possibilities of a mixed form of government, again, branches, separation of powers, checks and balances, and so forth, even federal systems. This comes into being. All of that from northern Italy, in particular in the Dante to Petrarch period. And that's what John Adams reads. That's what you can find in John Adams' famous book, The Defense of the Constitutions of the United States, where he comes down strongly as a big supporter of Machiavelli. That's what goes into then the Massachusetts Constitution with the three branches of government. That is what is taken over, really without any discussion, at the Constitutional Convention, right? And you see people like Madison strutting around. The real architect is John Adams, and then the help, of course, from Alexander Hamilton. Those, I think, are really the two, Adams and Hamilton, and Madison much less than what you would think, and Jefferson, a useful writer at certain times in 1776, but after that, often on the wrong side of these issues. Now, the reason this is so important right now, 700 years ago, to the day, to the hour practically, a huge attack on the modern state is now in the offing. These Tea Party fanatic lunatics, who are themselves unthinkable without the Wall Street puppet Obama. We've got this kind of revolving door. Bush leads to Obama. Obama leads to the Tea Party. The Tea Party leads to God knows what, the dictatorship of the Bonapartist General Petraeus. It's time to assert the perennial values of civilization, and I appeal with that to conservatives. If you're interested in the American tradition, you better be interested in Adams, Hamilton, Lincoln, and if you're not, you're no conservative. You're just a right-wing reactionary extremist. So we'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio.